Let's talk yellowtail snapper fishing. Welcome to the Good Karma Sport Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Captain Ryan Van Fleet. I want you guys to make the most out of your time fishing because I know a lot of you guys don't have a lot of time. And when you're visiting the Keys, you know, it might be your weekend, and I do the podcast to give back, so I try to give you guys a couple nuggets to make the most out of your time fishing, and that's what I'm going to do here today. So I'm going to talk about yellowtail snapper fishing and current. Okay, current is like a professional wrestler. 1 minute it's a hero, and the next minute, man, he can turn heel on you, become a villain, and start beating you down. So that's what current is, man. It can be your best friend or your worst enemy, and it can flip on you just like that and hit you in the back with a steel chair. So I'm going to try to tell you some things that you guys can do to work with it. I want you guys to make the most out of your time on the water fishing. So current. Here's what I recommend you do. When you go out to like depths of 100 feet, for example, and the current's moving at 3 miles an hour, don't immediately set your hook, okay? Here's my advice to you guys. First, when you get to the spot, I want you to calculate your drift. If it's moving at 3 miles an hour, I highly recommend that you look for the current break, okay? What that means is that I want you to start edging more towards the reef and look for the break. And you may be able to see it visually by looking for the rip. And that's one thing I tell people. You got to really learn how to read the water, not just by reading the water and looking for the current edge. You see the weed line there usually. And when you see the weed line, that's going to tell you where the current edge is at. So, for example, when that current edge might be in 120, it might be in 100, or it might be in 80. But you want to fish just inside that edge. And if the current's moving at 3 miles an hour on the current edge, that's when you go looking for your, what I call the current happy spot. That's the nice, comfy place. That's going to be a nice spot for you to fish. Now, the happy spot, I call it, for current, for me, the current that I like, which I do the best in, is a knot to a knot and a half current, sometimes up to 2. But if I'm fishing a 2-knot current, that's going to require a lot more chum. So I'd better be prepared to fish a 2-knot current for 4 to 5 hours. And I usually only fish the reef for a max of 5 hours to 6 hours on a half day. Now, sometimes if I'm moving spots, I'll fish 7, but most of the time when I'm yellowtail fishing hardcore, it's just a half day, and the clients are looking to catch meat, and that's what I do. So just to go back and kind of summarize things is that when I get to the spot, I'll calculate my drift. If I think the drift is moving a little bit too fast for anchoring, then I'll edge my way in closer to the reef until I find a break. And when I say a break, that means that the current slows down a little bit. And what I'm really looking for as far as current is like a knot and a half current. A knot and a half current in my eyes, and according to my logbooks and everything, that is the perfect current for snapper. A knot and a half, and mutton snappers and black groupers. They love it. Now, it's not a perfect scenario, and honestly, it's just not. So there's just days when I'll have a knot and a half current. I'll have it for 3 days, and I'll crush them. I'll get out there, and then I get to the same spot in 75 foot, and it's ripping. And I'll be like, what the hell am I going to do now? But I used to feel like that back when I was like, before I got the big picture, and I'd get frustrated. But my mind's clear now, so I'm able to think through it. So it just happened within the past few years where I just don't I'm able just to say, okay, well, I just have to find a break, and the fish have moved in a little bit, and I just relax and I make my move, and I just start itching a little closer. So I just have a lot of spots in that area. So the trick is having a lot of spots to fish where you know where the fish are going to move in and out, and that just takes a little time. And for the guys that yellowtail fish and fish one spot, I highly recommend that you branch out and do this if you're not already doing it. But 9 times out of 10, if the current's ripping in 75, then you just etch into 55, and it might be moving around a knot, and that's where your school's going to be at a really big fish. So people have to get this out of their brain that if they move in shallower, the fish are going to be smaller. In certain conditions, that's just the opposite. The big fish don't want to be in that heavy current. They want to be in the happy current, or they're going to be tucked down on the bottom. Now, one thing too, when you move into 65 to 75 foot, if the ledge is sharp, you can chum those really large fish that are hanging on the bottom in like 100 feet back into 65 to 70 foot. You can chum them into the shallower water. So that's something to think about if you brought copious amounts of chum with you. If not, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But if there's just so many different variables that go into it out there. So you just have to just keep that in mind when you go fishing on the reef, is that you're going to just be ready to make some maneuvers. I always like to say, hey, it's not easy, but you can make it look easy to people. You can make it look easy, and that's always my goal, is to make it look easy for people. And a lot of things I do naturally, I just can't explain why I do them. I just do it because it feels right. It's something I can't teach. So I hope you guys picked up on a couple things there as far as what to do when you've encountered heavy current, when you plan on yellowtail fishing. But what I highly encourage you guys to do is to go back and refresh yourself on the Florida Sportsman article that was written about me, and the one that I was on the cover for that you guys see. So I put that in the show notes for you guys. I outlined it, and I also I highlighted 3 podcasts that you guys need to go back and listen to. That'll be a good refresher for. Okay, what do I do when there's no current? I do a couple things. First, I look for current. So the scenario, and this happens a lot, I'll get to 65 foot or 55 foot or wherever I'm planning on fishing that day, and if there's no current, then I visually look for the rip. Okay, so that means I'll look out over the ocean, and I'll see if there's first I'll look for the slick, and that's the rip. And then I'll start moving my boat out to the deeper water, and I'll get on the outside of the rip line, and I'll calculate the current. If the current's like moving between 1.5 knots to 3 knots, I'll set the hook and put the chum out, and then start fishing. Now, what if there's no current in 100 feet? If there's no current in 100 feet, I quit, man. I go do something else. It's probably taken me about, you got to do the math. You think time doesn't fly on the water? What you think took 5 minutes actually took probably about a half an hour to do what I just talked about, because you got to be moving around and you got to test it, and it just takes time. You may have put the chum bag in the water, and time is money on the water. So I have a couple plans lined out, and before I take a charter, I may have a guy that has his heart set on yellowtail fishing, but we'll have a discussion about current, wind, and tide, and he has to have that understanding before I'll take him. It's just how it has to be. And 9 times out of 10, the client is like, okay, I understand it's fishing, and we can't always target what we have in our brains that we see on TV and YouTube. So not every day's perfect out there. It's tough. It can be challenging, actually, very challenging. It takes years to learn the current. When to be at a certain spot at a certain time, that's something that you need to be out on the water to learn how to do. And, some days it's just nothing's working. If you go out there to go reef fishing and nothing's working, you don't have a plan B and you don't want to go do something, just go home, call it a day, go the next day. Or I'll give you this little nugget here. You got to know the tides, okay? You got to be able to learn the tides. So you will have a little bit of movement on the reef. It may not be when you want it to be, but it may happen later. So I'll give you a couple scenarios. Like on Monday, for example, there was no current in on the reef. So you have to look at the tide, and usually in the afternoon the wind picks up a little bit out of the south, and that'll get that water moving. So you have to really do your homework out there and watch the wind finders in the morning. Kind of keep it on your phone. And if you're within cell phone reach, you can look and see when the wind's going to move out of the south, and that's going to move some water to the north. And that's when you can probably get a little bit of wind-driven tide. So just because that there's no tide doesn't mean you won't get a wind-driven tide. I think that I might be kind of stumbling on my words here, but in other words, you have to learn that. It's challenging. It's not easy out there. So some days you just got to fold it, man. I mean, if you burned all your chum in the morning trying to get something going and you tried, sometimes it's just best just to like go do something else. And if you have your heart set on trying going back to the reef and yellowtail fishing, then try it later. Wait till the conditions are right. So I got a message from Jesse, one of my listeners, and he said that, you know, he went to the reef in the morning and there was no current. And there was no current on Monday. There was no current in the morning. And he went. So his plan B was to go dolphin fishing. I gave some information out on Instagram about where the dolphin were at, and he sent me the pictures. He crushed them. So his plan B, he went to the reef, no current, but he got some ballyhoo. And so sometimes you get some bait up with no yellowtail. So if you're looking for bait, that's a different topic, different time. And he went out and he crushed the dolphin in 450 feet where I mentioned that to find him off the Keys on my Instagram post, because I was out on Sunday and I was out going dolphin fishing, which I've been doing a lot lately because I love the dolphin fish. Not a lot of people know that because most people know that I really am passionate about bottom fishing, but I love dolphin fishing. I love offshore fishing. But a lot of my clients now, man, they're all about the bottom fish, and that's cool because anytime you're fishing, it's all good. Like I say, it doesn't matter to me what they want to do as long as, as they're happy and I get, it's fishing in the end for me. But I have a passion for chasing big offshore fish, and I have the patience for it, and I have the right tools to do so with. So I do it whenever I get a chance. So when I don't have clients, I go by myself, and I love the fish. So anyway, so Jesse was coming in and he said in his email, he said the current picked up in the afternoon. So I was like, yeah. So sometimes it happens. The wind picked up a little bit out of the south and the blue water moved in and the fishing turned on. Now, tide is important, very important. It takes years to learn the tide and how the wind moves the tide and when to be at a spot at a certain time, when not to fish a spot. There's just so much that goes into it, and it's challenging. And if you think it's easy, there is no fast track. So you have to put in the time. And I'm just gonna keep saying it because that's what it takes, is to put in the time. It was challenging for me. I learned it. I'm learning something every day out there, and I make an effort to learn something every day on how a fish bites and how to fish all different types of tides. And it's so rewarding when I'm able to get a little tiny win out there. And it's just then that little tiny wind goes into a vault in my brain, and because I know I'm going to see that scenario again, and I know that this is what I'm going to do when I'm faced with that scenario. So I want you guys to think about that a little bit. And also too, it's cool that Jesse's been sending me reports, and he's been about the fish he's been catching, and I really appreciate that. And it seems like he's applying the tactics that I'm talking about. He's learning about the tide. He sent me a list of questions and things and topics. And that's way cool, bud. Thanks, Jesse. I really appreciate it, my friend. So I'm going to be, I'll talk a little bit more about tides and mutton snappers and all that good stuff here in the future. But the biggest thing is that I just want to tell, tides are tricky. You have to learn them. I can't stress enough about learning the tides. And you're going to be once you start figuring out patterns with the tides, you're going to start catching a lot more fish. I can almost guarantee it. So you just have to be out on the water to learn that. So, and sometimes if you're like, oh, I want to get out of bed and I want to go fishing super early in the morning because it's beautiful out, and then you get out there and you catch nothing, and you're like, oh, the fish aren't biting today. It's 11 o'clock, and I'm just going to go home. And then, boom, the tide turns on in the afternoon, and then the fish eat the paint off the back of the boat. It happens. So you got to be willing to, you have to learn those tides, and if you only have so much budgeted for fuel, then learning the tides are going to help you catch more fish in less time. as well. And there's lots of different tools out there you can use as far as learning currents and stuff. And, you can pull up like ripcharts.com. They'll help you find where the Gulf Stream's at if you want to go offshore for current. Now, tides, you got your tidesforfishing.com is really good. And with tides, you got to learn about the moon phases. That has a lot to do with the tides and how it moves water. So that's something that you'll need to learn as well, because it's just how it rolls. Some days those moon phases are more important than the tides as far as when the moon goes up, when the moon goes down, and how it relates to the tide and all that other good stuff. But, you got to dig into the vault when the fish aren't biting. So, and be able to understand that there's a bigger picture than just you going out there with your fishing gear and looking for, thinking that on the outgoing tide I'm going to catch yellowtail, or on the incoming tide, vice versa. But there's a bigger picture out there. I just, than just going out there and hoping you catch a fish. And so, but that's all part of it, learning. And that's, any good fisherman really is going to want to learn, and it's going to want to learn. And learning it on your own is a great tool. I can give you some tools to learn from, but you got to be able to have some instinct to develop on it, because it is challenging and there is a learning curve. And like I said in my previous podcast, that learning curve is there for a reason. That's all I got on tide. Tackle tip Thursday tomorrow. It's going to be good. I'm going to be talking about, I'm not going to share with you yet. So the internet's too fast, so you're going to have to wait. But I'm going to be talking about a product that I purchased from tackleroom.com. The customer service at tackleroom.com is awesome. The guys are fantastic, man. They get back to you really fast. Honestly, it's just a good site to buy from. So I'll talk. Okay, make sure you guys give me a follow on Instagram, Good Karma Sport Fishing _FL_Keys. You can follow me on Facebook, Good Karma Sport Fishing. Make sure you sign up for my newsletter. Also, I'm doing a weekly fishing report now instead of a bi-weekly, so you can tune in there as well. That's all I got. Gotta go. And remember, anytime you're fishing, it's all good.